The content on the Untold Tales channel is protected by copyright. Unauthorized use may result in legal liability. I was sitting on a couch, pouring myself some bourbon, with the slow realization that Friday evening was the only time peace reigned in the house. Cynthia, as usual, was flipping through a magazine, pretending to be interested in Scandinavian interior design. I knew she wasn't really interested. She just couldn't stand the silence that reminded her of us. The door slammed so hard that my glass nearly slipped from my hand. I turned around. In the hallway stood Kyla, my daughter. She was covered in bruises, her clothes torn, and her head was bloody. I stood up as if an electric shock had run down my spine. Kyla. I rushed to her, my heart pounding in my chest like I was under fire again. Dad, she whispered, losing her balance and collapsing into my arms. I gently sat her on the couch. Cynthia was already rushing over with a first aid kit, but everything she did seemed distant, mechanical, as if she didn't fully grasp that the daughter before her had just been beaten. Who did this? I nearly growled, trying to hold back the fury pulsing inside me like a cocked grenade. Kyla turned her eyes away. She paused for a second, as if gathering her breath. It was Richard Hoffman, a lawyer from your company. Her voice trembled. He was waiting at the school, offered to give me a ride. I got in. He's your guy, a family friend. I trusted him. My breath hitched. I could feel my fists clenching on their own. And then what? He turned off the road, said he wanted to talk, and then he started groping me. Right there while driving. I fought back, opened the door, and jumped out. Ran through the forest. I'm going to kill that bastard. I hissed, standing up. I swear, Cynthia, he'll destroy that scumbag. Kevin, wait, she cried, stepping between me and the door. You don't understand what you're saying. I looked at her like she was a stranger. He doesn't understand what he's done. This is my daughter. Do you see her face? Richard, he's a family friend. We've known him for 20 years, Kevin. He couldn't have. It's a misunderstanding. Cynthia spoke as if she was defending not just a person, but an icon. A misunderstanding? I almost shouted. Bruises on my daughter's body are a misunderstanding? Torn clothes, also a misunderstanding? Maybe the blood on her forehead is just a bad manicure. Kyla sniffled. I turned to her. It's okay, sweetie. Dad's here. You did the right thing. You're brave. Kevin. Cynthia lowered her voice, moved closer, and placed her hand on my shoulder. You don't know the whole truth. Kyla, she lies often. She's always seeking attention. Maybe she shut up. Just shut up. I stared at her, not recognizing her anymore. Right now, you're defending the man who touched your daughter, and you still call yourself a mother? I'm just saying it might not be as clear-cut as you think. You yourself said Richard was indispensable. He saved us $1 million contract 2 years ago, then let him file papers in hell, and explain there why he crawled under a 16-year-old girl's skirt. Cynthia recoiled. You've lost your mind? No, I whispered. I've just become the man I was before you, before all of this. The man who won't allow anyone to break his daughter, while his wife defends the bastard. I bent down to Kyla, whispering, Don't worry, sweetheart. Daddy will take care of this, and you're safe now. She squeezed my hand, her gaze hardening. I knew where that bastard lived, and I wasn't going to investigate further, despite how important he was for the company. Riverview, House 46. White SUV, parked by the side of the road. I quickly left the house. Everything inside me was in motion. My body remembered how to move. My mind knew what to do. Only one thing was left. He's not a lawyer. He's a corpse. He just doesn't know it yet. I sped down the dark road, adrenaline coursing through me. One word echoed in my mind. Richard. Everything I had known about him, as another man in our lives, was now shattered. He had been part of the family, a friend, a person I had trusted. And now, he betrayed me, betrayed my daughter. I wasn't going to let this go without consequences. When I pulled up to Richard's house, his white SUV was parked at the gates, perfectly positioned as if it had been there forever. He was home. That fucking bastard was inside. I stepped out of the car, took a few steps, and without hesitation, yanked the door handle. I closed my eyes, focusing. My legs coiled like springs, and I slammed into the door with all my might. It groaned under the impact and fell open. I stood in the doorway, like a beast ready to strike. Richard. I shouted, looking into the dark emptiness of the house. Richard, where are you? There was no answer. Silence wrapped around me like a heavy blanket. Moving into the hallway, I noticed something strange, a man lying on the floor. I stepped closer and stopped, feeling a chill run down my spine. It wasn't Richard. It was their accountant, Nicholas. His face was pale, his eyes wide, and a knife was sticking out of his chest, blood congealed around it. He was lying in a pool of blood, like a helpless toy discarded on the floor. Thoughts flashed through my mind. What happened? Why was he here? And why was Richard nowhere to be found? I bent down, instinctively trying to help, even though I knew it might be too late. My hands were shaking as I grabbed the knife, trying to pull it out. But then I realized if I did that, the blood would flow even faster and Nicholas wouldn't survive. Shit, what do I do now? Nicholas tried to say something. I heard muffled sounds as he barely moved his lips. I leaned closer, trying to decipher his words. But in that moment, his body convulsed, and he made his final breath. No, I cried out, trying to help, but it was too late. Nicholas wasn't breathing. His body felt heavy, like a stone. I pulled away, unable to believe what had just happened. What the hell is going on here? This devilish game, something's wrong. I stood among this nightmare, not knowing what to do next. My phone rang. I grabbed it without looking at the screen, just knowing who it was. It was Richard. Kevin. His voice was mocking and cold. Don't worry about your daughter. It's just a little game, you know? I like to mess around with younger girls sometimes, so don't make a tragedy out of it. You know you're nothing without me. What the hell is he talking about? This couldn't be true. My mind flipped upside down. Richard continued, laughing without a hint of shame. Oh, and one more thing, Kevin. Your wife didn't break down like your daughter. She was happy to spread her legs, even at your house. And now you'll have to deal with the consequences. I knew this wasn't a joke. It was a threat. He was destroying me. His words felt like iron, stabbing my soul. You bastard. I screamed into the phone. You'll pay for all of this. But before I could say more, the sound of sirens filled the air, the cops. Instantly, 2 officers rushed at me, grabbing my arms. This is not what you think. I tried to fight back, but their grip was too strong. We saw everything, Kevin. One of them said, knowing my situation was hopeless. You're under arrest. And so, as always, I found myself in the wrong place at the wrong time. But if I had known how it would end, I would have never allowed myself to forget about this killer in our family. I stood there, handcuffed, in the middle of my own life, which was now collapsing like a house of cards. The police surrounded me, their faces calm, cold. I was like a prisoner in a cage, and this nightmare felt too real. Everything was spinning in my head. I couldn't believe the accusations being leveled against me. Kevin, said one of the officers who stood right in front of me. His voice was quiet but firm. We are detaining you on suspicion of money laundering and murder. All the evidence points to you being involved in these crimes. I nervously laughed, trying to hide my fear. This is insane. I shouted, struggling to break free from their grip. I didn't do anything. It's a setup, I'm telling you. They didn't react, not deviating from their course. They looked at me like a criminal. One of the officers' fingers tightened around a folder of documents, and he pulled out some papers, laying them out in front of me as evidence. Here's what we have, Kevin. He pointed to the papers. These are fake invoices that you processed through your company. This money is dirty money. We've traced its origins. Everything points to the mafia. You funneled the money through your firm. You cashed it out. Your fingerprints are on every document, every invoice. I felt the ground slipping from beneath me. This was so absurd. No, it wasn't me. It was Richard. I screamed, trying to suppress my fear. He used me. He framed me. I didn't do this. Richard? The officer smirked. You're saying Richard set all of this up? He has an airtight alibi, Kevin. We've checked all of his movements, and there's no connection between him and you or the money. And by the way, all your fingerprints are on the documents. He can't be involved in this. I could feel my hands starting to sweat. Everything I tried to explain made no sense. It was like I had fallen into a trap with no way out. This is not true. I shouted again. He sold me out. He set this all up. He manipulated everyone and now framed me. You hear me. He called me himself, said he did it, and now I have to pay for it all. He killed Nicholas. He organized everything. One of the officers stepped back, looking me in the eyes, and said, "You don't get it, Kevin. We've checked all the records, all the movements. We know everything. Richard got what he wanted. He gave us everything. All the information about your role in these events. You cashed out the money. You processed it through accounts. And your trail is everywhere." I couldn't believe what these people were saying. I was sure it was all a lie, but how could I prove it wasn't me? Are you completely insane? I tried to break free from their hold again, but they held me down. This was his game. He manipulated me. Richard is the one you want. And now he walks away. And I'm sitting here like a criminal. At that moment, one of the officers' phones rang, and he spoke quietly into it. I couldn't hear what he was saying, but I saw his face change. When he hung up, he turned to me. "Kevin," he said, with a new tone, "your murder charges have just been confirmed. Your fingerprints were found on the weapon used to kill Nicholas. Everything points to you." I felt a wave of sickness wash over me. It was like a lightning strike that blinded me. I tried to hold it together, to fight what seemed impossible. But how could I defend myself when everything around me pointed to me? "No," I shouted again. "I didn't kill him. Richard did it. He framed me." One of the officers stepped closer, looking at me as if everything had already been decided. "You figured it out too late, Kevin. All the evidence is against you. We checked everything. Richard didn't just provide us with proof. He gave us everything we needed to lock you up. You won't get out of this. You were the one who sold your soul for money. Now you'll pay for it." I stood in complete silence, as if cursed. What I do now? I didn't even know how to keep fighting, how to prove my innocence when every step and every word had already played against me. All that was left was to wait. Wait until they tore my life apart. I was given no chance. All the evidence was against me, and I knew it. All I could do was sit in my cell and listen as time passed, my future slipping through my fingers like sand. The fate was sealed. I was charged with the heaviest offenses, and a long sentence was handed down, decades in prison. It was pointless to even try to contest it, because the entire system was against me. My wife, she didn't even write, didn't call. At first, I hoped it was just a temporary delay, that everything would become clear, that she would believe me. But with each passing day, with each letter from the lawyers, I realized more and more that Cynthia had likely chosen him. Richard. Or maybe she was just scared. Who knows? And I couldn't even call my daughter. I wasn't allowed to contact her. They told me she was safe, but in truth, I knew nothing about her. Just emptiness. And that was it. Time passed, and here I was being taken to prison. In handcuffs like an animal. In isolation. How'd I end up here? How did they drag me into this hell? I can't understand. It doesn't make sense. But here it was, the reality that had truly consumed me. The vehicle I was being transported and rolled down a deserted road. Quietly, without words. Only the dull sound of tires on asphalt and the sounds of the guards breathing. One of the guards spoke quietly into his radio. I slid my gaze over their faces. They didn't look at me, didn't try to see a person. To them, I was just an object to be taken to a place of confinement. Suddenly, a sharp sound, as if something tore through the air, then a loud shot. The vehicle jolted suddenly, and I felt it start to veer off the road, throwing us out of control. We skidded, and I clenched my seat, feeling myself being tossed around. Inside my head, chaos erupted. Everything was spinning. My head struck the side window with a dull thud. Darkness consumed my eyes. I heard gunshots, but I could no longer make sense of what was happening. Strange sounds, thundering and rustling. Gunfire. And it didn't feel like a regular shootout from a movie. All I felt was the adrenaline coursing through my body, but I couldn't control anything. The vehicle shook, and at some point I lost consciousness from the pain in my head. When I came to, I was in another place. Darkness surrounded me. Only the faint light from headlights and vague silhouettes of people. I couldn't understand what was happening. I felt myself being dragged from a vehicle. My head spun, and everything around me was blurry. I barely noticed that there were people in black masks. They moved quickly, decisively, ignoring me. The guards? They were gone. I saw them lying still on the ground. These masked people coldly approached them and shot them. It all happened so fast, so cold-blooded, I didn't even realize what it meant. They grabbed me by the arms, dragged me through the dirty earth, and I could barely keep my feet. They said nothing, just dragged me into the shadow, somewhere to the side, into the darkness. I felt my consciousness slipping into the deep abyss again, and the world around me blurred. Then, another blow to the head, and I lost consciousness. Darkness engulfed me, and I felt nothing. I didn't understand where I was, who I was, or what would happen next. The next thing I knew, I woke up in another place. But this was far from the world I had known. Where was I? Who were these people? All I knew was that I was alive, but what would happen to me now? When the bag was finally pulled from my head, bright light blinded me, and for a moment, I couldn't make anything out. I quickly squinted, feeling the straps tight around me as I was bound to a hard chair. With every sound around me, my heart beat faster. Who were they? Where was I? But eventually, my eyes started adjusting to the light, and I saw the silhouette of a person standing before me. His figure was dark, unclear, but I knew this wasn't just any person. This was someone who made me sit here. This was the one who caught me. He wasn't very old, but there was a presence in his gaze that you could feel. A man with serious, penetrating eyes that seemed to cut through me. He took off his dark sunglasses, and I saw his face, sharp features, a strong jaw. He was calm, but in that calmness there was a threat that you could sense on an instinctual level. Finally, he said, his voice soft but with a pressing firmness. I thought you'd never wake up. I tried to move, but realized that my hands and feet were bound. Helplessness overwhelmed me completely. Who are you? I asked, trying to control my voice, but it came out weak. My name, he paused, as if considering whether to tell me. But then he continued. Johnny Storm McKay. Remember that, Kevin. If you have any idea who you're talking to. I flinched, but tried not to show my fear. What do you want from me? I don't know what you're talking about. McKay smirked mockingly, and I noticed how his fingers slid across the table, as though he was in his element, like a predator who wasn't in a hurry to attack. Don't pretend. His voice became sharp. You know exactly what I want. You've meddled in my affairs, and now you have to pay for it. You stole my money, and now you owe me. I tensed but continued to deny it. I didn't steal any money. I don't have your money. Are you crazy? McKay suddenly stood up and walked toward me. His movements were fast and precise. He sat down next to me, looking me straight in the eye. I smelled expensive tobacco and alcohol, but something in his gaze made me shiver. I don't believe you, he said with such certainty that I felt my strength begin to falter. Richard, your friend, who set you up, stole my money. And now you're here because he led us to you. He pinned everything on you. You thought I wouldn't find you? That you could hide in prison? Not a chance. I shook my head. You're wrong. I don't know anything. I didn't steal your money. I don't know where it is. I don't know who did this, but I'm not guilty. Johnny McKay only smirked, and there was nothing good in his smile. You realize that in prison, you mean nothing to me? I don't believe you. You can't hide from me. He waved his hand, and from the shadows, a giant emerged. This hulking beast, as big as an ox, approached me and stared me down. I tried to keep my composure, but the fear burned inside me. McKay looked at me again. You're just a tool, Kevin. You have no idea who's in charge here. I can't waste time talking. He looked at the giant. This guy is going to help you remember what you've forgotten. You won't be complaining about his methods. He nodded sharply, and the giant, without waiting a second, raised his fist and hit me across the face. A lightning bolt of pain pierced my jaw, and I felt the blood pour from my lips. Everything blurred in front of my eyes, and I tried to recover. McKay continued to look at me calmly. Come on, Kevin, you can talk. Do you remember what I need? Or do we need to continue, so you don't forget who you are and who I am? My eyes flashed with pain, but I wasn't going to give up. I don't know anything about the money, and I won't say something I don't know. It's Richard. He planned everything. I was just a pawn in his game. McKay stood up and moved closer. His face was inches from mine, and his words sounded like a sentence. You're your own ominous sentence, Kevin, he whispered. Richard sold you out behind your back, and now you're trying to justify yourself, trying to play the saint. It won't help. You're the owner of the company, and the money's with you. So stop pretending to be the victim. You'll give me everything, or you'll die. painfully. At that moment, the giant raised his fist again, and I felt his fist hit my face once more, but I couldn't resist anymore. Everything around me went black. McKay looked at me with disdain. It's up to you, Kevin. You can either cooperate, or I'll forget you, just like I forgot Richard. Either you tell me where the money is, or I'll keep feeding you to this beast until you start talking. I could barely open my eyes, everything swimming in pain. But I couldn't give up Richard. All I could do was stay silent. McKay stood up again, walking over to the giant, who looked at me like I was an object. He nodded to him, and the giant was already preparing to land another blow. McKay moved away from the chair, his steps calm, almost lazy. He shrugged off his coat and threw on the chair, giving me one last look full of indifference and contempt. I see you don't want to cooperate. His voice was soft, almost indifferent, as if he were talking about handing over his old jacket to the dry cleaners. Well then, let's not waste time. To the furnace with this bastard. Roast him to a crispy crunch. And when he wants to tell me something useful, call me. His words were as precise as a shot, and without waiting for a reply, he simply turned and left, leaving me alone with this nightmare. At that moment, four massive thugs rolled toward me, and I felt them grab my arms and drag me like a sack of potatoes. No questions, no explanations. Just the forces that decide your fate. We descended into a dark, cold basement. I felt the air grow heavy and stale, as if I had entered a tomb. When my eyes adjusted to the darkness, I realized what awaited me. In the center of the basement stood a giant cremation furnace, a massive metal structure, hissing and rattling like an angry beast, ready to swallow anything that came its way. They shoved me toward a table, where I painfully found myself kneeling, and then, like a duck on a platter, they strapped me to the metal supports. Every movement was filled with pain, but I couldn't do anything. All I could do was watch the flames already roaring in the open furnace door. One of the thugs, tall with a harsh expression, approached me with a chilling smile. See this, Kevin? He pointed to the fire, which burned with a fierce, cruel tongue of flame. This is what will happen to you if you don't start talking. We need you to be talkative. I was gasping from fear and pain, but I tried to keep myself together. I knew that if I opened my mouth now, it would only speed up my end. The second thug chuckled, leaning toward me. He was even bigger than the first, and the smell of booze from him was almost suffocating. Well, don't like it? You thought they would just take you to prison, right? Well, here it is, the real place for people who can't keep their mouths shut and take other people's money without asking. Ever seen others burn? No. Well, you'll be the first. I tried to say something, but I couldn't. My throat was dry, and cold sweat came my face. Don't worry, Kevin, the third thug, with a meat-like face, stepped closer and crossed his arms. We're all like one team here. You're just one of our projects. We'll roast you, and that's it. Nothing personal. You were just in the wrong place at the wrong time. And now, you probably understand that you're in our furnace. The fourth thug stood by the control lever of the conveyor, throwing a look at me full of darkness. Time's up, he said with a grin. Time to send you on your last cruise. They lifted me and laid me on the metal stretcher, which gradually began to move along the conveyor. I couldn't move, only feeling my nails scraping against the metal, while my shoes, old and worn, began to smolder from the heat. With every movement of the conveyor, I felt the flames getting closer and closer. Then I heard a crack. It was my shoes. They had started to burn. Sparks flew in all directions. The hot tongues of flame reached for me like sticky, greedy hands. You were waiting for this, huh? One of them asked mockingly, standing by the controls. Waiting for your feet to burn? Waiting to see your shoes catch fire? Well, here it is. I tried to break free, but my strength was leaving me. With each step of the conveyor, with each inch I moved closer to the flames, I felt fear wrapping around me. All that was left was to pray to God that this nightmare would end, and that I would at least have a chance to say what needed to be said. My shoes were already on fire. I could feel the flames devouring them, the skin beginning to burn. And I knew that this was just the beginning. When I felt the heat starting to set my shoes on fire and the flames crawling higher up my legs, everything in my head became clear. In that moment, I realized that if I didn't escape, I would die. But how? I was tied up, strapped to this table, and the flames were getting closer. I started looking for a way out, and then I noticed one of the thugs standing by the furnace and looking at me with a mocking expression, as though he had already decided I wouldn't escape. His eyes were full of malice, and in that moment, it hit me. I had to use him. He stood there, leaning against the metal, as if relishing his success. "Hey," I barely muttered, trying to make my voice sound convincing. "Don't you think you should come a little closer? I got something important for you." He leaned in, apparently thinking I was going to mumble something about betrayal or begging for mercy. That was his mistake. I didn't wait. I just lunged. My hands, still weakly gripping the metal bars, transferred all the remaining strength to my right hand, and I, like a tiger, latched onto his nose. The taste of blood filled my mouth as I squeezed his nose so hard that he screamed in pain. The guard yelped, stumbling back, but I didn't let go. This was my chance. I felt his body lift off the metal surface as he tried to pull away. Tearing at his fingers, I gripped him tightly, and he unwittingly pulled me out of that metal trap. I fell, wrapped in smoke and scorched fabric. My legs were on fire. My body was burning. I heard someone scream, but everything happened so fast I couldn't distinguish who was shouting. Then, a second thug appeared with a machete, huge like an ox. He raised the weapon, preparing to strike me, but I made my move first. The straps that held me proved to be the perfect trap. I positioned them for the blow, and the machete entered them with such force that I was freed. My body came alive. I grabbed the machete and, in one swift motion, struck. The bastard didn't even blink before I severed both of his legs. He collapsed, but I didn't stop. With another swing, I decapitated him, and his head flew off, leaving the body swaying unsteadily in place. A gunshot pierced the silence, and I instantly turned. The second thug with a gun aimed it at me, but I didn't give him a chance to shoot again. With the same furious motion, I severed his arm with the gun, and he howled in pain, losing the weapon. The third, with huge arms and a rough face, tried to approach me with a knife, but his movement was slow. Sensing the smell of blood, I leapt at him, and the next moment, the knife sliced through his abdomen. He started grabbing at his falling intestines, but I didn't slow down. I drove the knife into his chest, and I heard him gasp for breath, but it was already too late. The fourth, small and with a nervous gaze, took an axe, trying to approach me from behind. But I was faster. I threw the machete straight into his mouth, and he choked, the last scream escaping his throat. His body fell, not even realizing what had happened. I stood among the bodies, blood spreading across the floor, and these bastards hadn't even realized what had just happened. They were stunned, their eyes full of an indescribable fear they had never faced before. I didn't give them time to recover. I moved quickly, making every step deliberate and fast. I knew I had a chance, and if I missed it, it would be the end. I grabbed one of the thugs on the stretcher, tossed him onto the conveyor, took another quick step, and threw these bastards onto it like sacks of sand. I quickly tied them up, using anything I could find. They could no longer move. I kicked the stretcher, and they flew straight into the flames of the cremation furnace. The door slammed shut with a crash, and I heard the flames consuming their bodies. They were gone, as they should be, and I stood there, wiping the blood off my face, feeling my breathing steady, my body slowly returning to normal. This was just the beginning. As I stood among the corpses, slowly smoldering in the furnace, I didn't feel relief. No, this wasn't a release from pain or revenge that brings comfort. It was something much deeper. I had returned to what I had been before, and every step, every movement I made reminded me that I wasn't just a businessman. I was a hunter, and in that moment, I was once again that man. My life before this was simple, so to speak. I was Kevin, an ordinary businessman who didn't raise suspicions and didn't seek trouble. But this world, this ugly world, filled with traitors, thieving thugs, and corrupt people, left no choice. And I knew that if I didn't act, if I didn't clean it up, I would become part of that filth. I remembered how, once upon a time, I had cleaned the streets alone, wiping out the gangsters and criminals who thought they could do whatever they wanted. I remembered how my knife became my best friend, how every move was precise and decisive. No witnesses, only bodies and fire. No traces, no mercy. These bastards didn't deserve life, and I was the one who took it from them. I wasn't a killer. I was a force that cleansed the streets of rotting humanity. Remembering those moments was almost like returning to a past life. I saw myself in an old mirror in the same style, cold, calculating, ruthless. Back then, I left no witnesses and everything I did was tied to fire. I knew how to destroy everything to the last trace. And here, today, I was once again that man. I stood in this basement, looking at the destroyed bodies of those pathetic bastards, and I knew one thing. They would pay dearly for mistaking me for just another businessman. They thought they could manipulate me, set me up. They had no idea what awaited them. But they would soon find out. It was time to remember the old days, time to get back to business. And not in an office, but here, among the flames and blood. Every blow, every movement, every plan I had made in my head was about returning this world to balance. And I knew that here, in these walls, I could do that. I wasn't planning to walk away quietly. Not today. All these bastards who played their dirty game thought they could use me as a pawn. But I wasn't a pawn. I was the one who cleaned up the filth that made this world even more disgusting. This was just another cleanup. I whispered to myself, like an old mantra, forcing my thoughts back into the right track. All I need is the right weapon and the right target. And no mercy. I wiped the blood off my face, which dripped from my chin. I took off everything that remained from these bastards, both their clothes and the memory of the fact that I was once just a businessman. I wasn't a businessman. I was a hunter. And in that moment, I returned to the life I knew. It was time to act. Time to work, but not in the office. I kept moving through the underground complex, feeling my breathing getting heavier. But now I no longer felt pain or fatigue. Adrenaline coursed through me, and I knew I had to keep moving. I was alive, and that meant there was still a chance to finish what I started. And then I stumbled upon a huge warehouse. Everything around me was filled with weapons, crates, boxes, bags. If only they knew who was close by. But alas, that wouldn't save them. The room was full of people who had no idea that their end had already come. For a moment, I stopped, assessing the situation. Weapons, automatic rifles, ammunition. This was exactly what I needed. I approached the nearest guy, who, judging by his appearance, had no idea who was standing behind him. He had a pistol in his hand, but he didn't even have time to draw it before I grabbed the machete that was nearby and, with one swing, slashed him across the shoulder. "Can't you see I'm busy?" I leaned in, looking at him like a helpless victim. He groaned, trying to get up, but I drove a knife straight into his stomach, twisting it sharply to prevent any chance. He gasped and coughed up blood, and I took the rifle he never even tried to use. "Oh, these experts," I muttered, inspecting the weapons. Never trust a guy with a small pistol, especially if he doesn't know how to handle an automatic. Before I could look around, I ran deeper into the warehouse and spotted them, people actively working on packaging weapons. I was about to say something, but I realized they were too busy to take me seriously. I didn't give them a chance to say anything. I picked another one. This guy was standing on a platform, helping with something. I rushed up behind him, drove the knife into his neck, and quickly yanked it out, not giving him time to even scream. He collapsed right into a pile of weapon crates. The others started yelling, but I was already there. Grabbing the rifle, I began shooting them down like targets at a shooting range. The bullets tore through bodies, shredding everything around. It was so easy, it felt like I was in my element, and every shot brought a kind of inhuman satisfaction. Then I noticed the platform standing in the middle of the warehouse. Without a word, I jumped onto it, as if it were my personal throne. I grinned and aimed the huge machine gun at the crowd. "So, guys," I muttered as I squeezed the trigger, "you think you can stop me?" Easy. The bullets tore through the air, turning them into meat. I spare no one. The firestorm was so powerful that they didn't even have time to realize it was over. Bodies fell, blood poured, and I only enjoyed the spectacle. But amidst all this chaos, I spotted the main one, the guy at the end of the chain. He was trying to sneak toward the exit, hoping to escape. His steps became noticeable even amidst the chaos. But I knew he wouldn't get away. "Well, look at you," I said, stopping the machine gun and resting the rifle against the wall. "All your partners have fallen, and you decided to run? Just like in the movies, huh?" He grabbed a pistol and bolted for the exit, glaring at me. Then he jumped into a car and sped off with a screech. I smirked and pulled out a stinger, small but deadly. A shot, and the car turned into a fireball, launching up and flipping, but the bastard was still alive. Covered in blood, he barely crawled out, gasping, and cursed me. I walked up to him. He turned to me, hoarsely asking, "Who the hell are you?" I looked at him with a sneer, knowing that it no longer mattered. He had just brought his own verdict. "Who am I?" I repeated with a smile. "It doesn't matter anymore who I am. The important thing is that this no longer concerns you." I grabbed the knife and, without hesitation, drove it straight into his temple. He didn't even have time to scream. I stood over his body, shaking my head. "Well, at least you died quickly, and you didn't have to suffer long." I glanced at what was left of his men. The bodies were scattered across the warehouse. Some of them were still trying to move, but they were no longer a threat. I grabbed an anti-personnel mine, pulled the pin, and threw it onto the boxes with grenades. Everything exploded, and now no one would be alive. I quietly opened the door and stepped into the bedroom, trying not to make a sound. The light was dimmed, but still bright enough to see what was happening. And, damn it, what I saw made my blood boil. Richard and Cynthia. That was the last straw. They didn't know I was here, standing, watching them enjoy each other, as if nothing had happened, as if I were just a void in their lives. She seemed to not even notice me, while he, with his arrogant grin, lost all the traits I once knew. "You've come quite far, huh?" I said, my voice low and clear, with a touch of cynical amusement. "Enjoying yourselves here, thinking you're safe, that no one will find you." They both froze. Cynthia's eyes widened, and judging by her expression, she realized it was over. Richard, like a scalded man, rushed to the table, trying to grab the pistol that was so close. He thought he would make it, that he had a chance, but he didn't know I was prepared. In one sharp motion, I pulled out the knife and, without hesitation, threw it. It embedded itself in his shoulder, pinning him to the table with such force that he immediately collapsed. Richard let out a wild scream of pain, but I only smirked. "You thought you could stop me?" I took a step toward him, and his gaze faded, not believing that it had all ended so quickly. Cynthia started screaming, but I simply waved my hand, as if swatting away an annoying fly. "Shut up," I said. "You've already lost everything." She kept shrieking, but it didn't matter. I approached Richard, who was writhing in pain. "Do you even realize what you've done, you scumbag?" I leaned down, a sarcastic smile forming on my lips. "You ruined everything, thinking you could just play these games." Richard tried to say something, but the words got stuck in his throat, and only a rasping sound escaped his mouth. "Where's my daughter?" I asked sharply, not paying attention to his suffering. "Is she safe?" Richard, despite the pain, barely managed to exhale. "She's in a closed school," he spoke with difficulty, hoping his words would be his last. "We sent her there. It was the best decision." I stood, consumed by rage, processing what I had just heard. A closed school? That meant she was now under surveillance, her life in the hands of these bastards. And they had no idea that I wouldn't let this slide. I turned to Cynthia, who was still trying to justify herself. "Don't say anything to me," I said coldly, uninterested in her words. "You've always been just a pawn in his game, and now both you and Richard are nothing more than corpses to me." She started screaming again, but I simply ignored her. My focus was on what I needed to take. I approached the table, grabbed the bags of money they held like their last treasure. "Now you'll be homeless," I said, lifting the bags and tossing them aside. "Forget about your rich life." They yelled something at me, desperately trying to regain control of the situation. But their words no longer mattered. Richard, in agony, muttered through his clenched teeth, "You'll pay for this, Kevin. You and your daughter. I'll find you, and you'll regret starting this." I just smirked. "You'll find me, sure," I said, taking my time to leave the room. "But only after I'm done with you." I made my way to the door, unhurried. Before leaving, I turned on my phone and activated the device I had prepared earlier. A minute later, I heard the ominous hum as a powerful explosion tore through the house. The villa exploded in a bright flash, tearing everything to pieces. Fire and flames engulfed everything I had left behind. Their screams, their promises of revenge, all disappeared in the fire. In that moment, I knew one thing. It was over. Everything they had tried to build was now ashes. And I was the one who had taken care of it. After the explosion that destroyed everything connected to Richard and Cynthia, I felt neither joy nor relief. All I felt was emptiness. But despite this, there was one thing I needed to take my daughter. It wasn't just a desire. It was a necessity. I drove to the closed school where they had sent her. The road was long, and I knew time was against me, but I was determined. When I arrived at the gate, the guard tried to stop me, but I didn't even bother speaking to him. I simply pulled him out of the car, and in one swift move, broke his arm. "You all right?" I asked him as he screamed in pain. He looked at me in horror and nodded, not knowing what to do. "You don't want to continue, got it?" I left him standing by the road and carried on. This guy wasn't a threat. He was just part of the system. When I reached the building, I was lucky. The school was quiet, and there was no security that could stop me. I quickly pulled my daughter out of there, and we left, leaving everything behind. She sat beside me, as always, but her eyes were full of questions. "Are you all right?" I looked at her, trying to hide my worry. "It's okay. We're getting out of this." She nodded, but in her eyes, I could see that she didn't believe me. But it didn't matter. We were together. On the outside, I was able to do what I couldn't in prison, find evidence of my innocence. I knew Richard had manipulated everyone and framed me. But now, outside, it was much easier to get the necessary information, which I was able to gather. When I opened those very documents that proved my innocence, I felt the weight that had been pressing on my chest finally lift. We moved far from where we had been, to the coast where no one knew who I was. I bought an old bar located right on the shore on a small cliff. It was a secluded place with windows that offered a stunning view of the ocean. Here I could live in peace, minding my own business. There was no police, no threats. It was easy to breathe. The bar became my new home. I restored it, making it a cozy and quiet place. Now every day was my own choice, not someone else's decision. Then I met her, Lisa. She was local, worked as a waitress at one of the nearby bars, but we often crossed paths, and I immediately felt that she was different from the others. We started talking, then began spending more time together. She was smart, strong, and in her eyes I saw something alive, something I had been missing. We often sat on the bar's terrace, watching the sunset and laughing, making the world our own. I told her who I really was, but she didn't turn away from me. She accepted my past, and most importantly, she saw me for who I was now. My daughter now felt safe. She started smiling again. Perhaps we were far from everything, but in this seclusion, we finally began to feel that everything would be okay. It was quiet. It was peaceful. I no longer ran from my life. On the contrary, I had created it anew. And even though I knew the past could return, I was ready. In this new life, I was not who I had been before. I was the one who held my destiny in my hands. And now that mattered. I lived for myself and for those I loved. In this bar by the sea, my daughter, Lisa, and I were building our new life, and despite everything that had happened, I knew that now I was where I belonged.